everybody, Plushie here, and yet another extremely powerful single target art servant has been released in the form of Uesugi Kenshin, or Ruler Kagetora. This is obviously a very hyped up character, and people really like to talk about her comparisons with other pre-existing powerful single target arts options. So today I want to sort of explore that aspect and compare her to some other units, of course talk about how I feel about the servant as a whole. So without further ado, let's get into today's hot take of Uesugi Kenshin. So before we even get into her skills, there's a couple of things I want to highlight about Kenshin's base stats. So Kenshin has the highest attack stat out of all SSR rulers, tied with Ruler Melusine and Sherlock Holmes. This makes her damage pretty decent because do remember that rulers have a hidden 1.1 time multiplier whenever calculating their damage. So when you take that into consideration, her attack stat is actually pretty serviceable and above average amongst all servants. Secondly, Kenshin has extremely powerful arts cards. She has a base 0.62% MP gain per hit on a 4-hit arts card, giving her a 2.48% MP gain on each of her arts cards. And this is extremely rare for a servant with her kind of deck. Usually, these kinds of arts cards are only given to servants with a singular arts card in their entire deck. And Kenshin is a servant with a arts MP and 2 arts cards. So this means Kenshin has a uncharacteristically high card MP gain on top of her already decent MP refund. So Kenshin will be able to use her MP extremely easily in challenge quests because even uncritted arts cards will yield her a bunch of MP gain, and as we'll see later, she has a bunch of ways to boost that arts card's MP gain with her own skill set as well. Kenshin's first skill is a 3-turn 30% crit up, a 3-turn 500% star absorb up, and a 2-time 3-turn evade on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is a pretty nice skill with multiple effects. We have the great combo of critical damage up paired up with star absorb up. 30% crit up for 3 turns is a pretty serviceable number, even though it is not 50%. We've seen 50% more and more common nowadays, but still I think 30% is a nice number, and 500% star absorb up is more than enough for a ruler class servant. And finally, the 2-time 3-turn evade skill we've seen multiple times, mostly on quick servants though, interesting enough, such as Tyra, Huyenjuo, and to some extent Okuni all have this skill, and we've known that the skill is pretty decent as a survival skill in particular. So overall, nice skill. You can use this skill whenever just for the crit boost and star absorb up because the evade is spread across 3 turns and multiple hits, so you don't really have to worry about wasting it when you want the crit up to be on as high uptime as possible. Kenshin's second skill is a 3-turn 30% arts up, a 50 MP battery, and a 15 star per turn generation effect, all on a 6-turn cooldown. Now this is an extremely stacked skill. 3-turn 30% arts up is a great steroid, especially on an arts servant with such powerful arts cards like Kenshin. 50 MP battery is a big number. A lot of times for single targets they only give them 30 MP battery, so 50 does give her an edge above some of her other competitions, and it's extremely good in both challenge quests and in particular farming, because paired up with a maxed out Pen 2, she only needs an additional 30 MP charge to use her MP for the first time, which also has great refund by the way, as we'll see later, but importantly this is extremely accessible in an arts team because of Castoria's AoE 30 MP charge on the first skill, so she's a very good multi-core DPS because of this as well. And finally, 15 stars per turn is a huge number. Usually you only get 10, so 15 is very much appreciated, especially on an arts servant who usually has trouble generating stars on their own. And now combine that with her first skill, she has a self-sufficient crit engine with star absorb up, critical damage up, and 15 stars per turn, making her a really decent arts crit servant. And being an arts crit servant, especially with such powerful arts cards, is once again very powerful. In a challenge quest with a single critted arts card, she can probably get her MP back extremely easily. So yeah, once again, very powerful skill, and also I'm glad that they didn't gimp the cooldown by making it 7, in particular because the star per turn effect lines up very well with her first skill, star absorb up, so having both of those at 6-turn cooldown is very nice. Kenshin's third skill is interestingly enough a targetable skill, and it gives the target a 2-stage overcharge boost for 1 time 3 turns, 20% attack up for 3 turns, and 30% MP gain up for 3 turns, on a 6-turn cooldown as well. I'd say even if this wasn't targetable, it's still pretty decent. The overcharge is a little bit lackluster on herself because her overcharge is just an arts boost for a single turn before MP damage, but it still helps her MP damage and refund, so that's pretty nice. The 20% attack up for 3 turns is a nice steroid because she already has 2 other different buff types with crit up and arts up, so when you combine all 3 of them, they stack multiplicatively. It's pretty nice, so yeah, overall. And also MP gain up by 30% for 3 turns, further bolstering her already insane arts cards and her refund as well. So she actually has really nice refund as a single target servant. And this skill being targetable also gives her very good synergy with certain teammates, so she can work well with, you know, other anti-trade servants in multi-core setups to bolster their damage even further. She works well with Tonelico in particular because Tonelico really wants overcharge boost to reduce the cooldown of her third skill, which is one of the most powerful skills in multi-core farming. You know, AoE 50 MP battery and MP damage up really strong. And also in challenge quest, this is a great skill to pair with Castoria because it gives your entire team 2 extra hits of solemn defense. I almost wish only the overcharge was targetable and the other 2 buffs stuck to herself, but you know, I guess this is sort of a demerit, but sometimes it could also be a positive. It's very situational, but overall, yeah, having this flexibility is very nice because of how strong some characters' overcharge effects are. This is kind of reminiscent of Summer Castoria as well, because Summer Castoria is also a single target arts DPS with a targetable overcharge, making her a good teammate with Tonelico and normal Castoria as well. So we will get into more comparison between her and Castoria, but you know, if you know how good that is on Castoria, it's equally good on Kenshin as well. Surprisingly enough, I think Kenshin's passives are pretty mid. Magic Resistance B is nothing crazy. Writing A, she only has 1 quick card, and it's not even that good compared to her arts cards and stuff. Even during solos, I very much prefer doing MPAA rather than MPQB Mighty Chains. Divinity A, usually just a debuff, gets countered by weird boss gimmicks and certain servants like Mao Nobunaga that can remove her buffs now. And interesting enough, speaking of buff removal, she has 10% buff removal resist and also insta-kill resist, but 10% is such a meme number. Like, I know during certain min-turn quests, if you want to cut down on specific supports, you can't bet on this, especially when you combine this with like one of the ring command codes that give another 10% buff removal resist up per ring. You can get up to 40%. So now it doesn't sound that bad, but overall I don't think any of her passives are particularly game-changing. Like, you can remove all of them, she'd still be fine. Finally, Kenshin's MP is a single target arts MP with 4 hits that removes all enemy buffs before damage, and also deals 150% extra damage against man attribute enemies. And finally, its overcharge effect is a 1-turn arts up that happens before the MP does damage for a single turn that scales from 20% all the way up to 40%. So full buff purge on a super spammable MP is super broken. Like, I don't think we've ever seen such a spammable MP have this kind of effect, and it's really scary. Like, full buff purge is still one of the best effects in the game, in my opinion, to tag onto an MP, because it covers both offensive and defensive fronts during a challenge quest. It removes obviously all defensive buffs, you know, including solemn defense that is not pierceable. It also removes guts that doesn't actually qualify as a defensive buff. So for example, if you have someone like Krimhild or Summer Ibuki that only removes defensive buffs, they actually can't remove guts, while this can. Also, this removes all offensive buffs, obviously, like, you know, attack ups, crit chance ups and whatnot, but it also removes effects that can potentially break through your own defense, like sure hits, like Invo Pierce, or even more rare effects like Barghest, you know, buff removal on attack. They're all removable. So full buff purge is such a versatile effect for challenge quests. Now, you might argue so many challenge quests these days have unremovable buffs, right? They act as the main gimmicks of the fight, but you have to remember, all of the bosses, you know, skills that they spam, that they use innately, are all removable. And also, most break skills are removable, even though they act as major boss gimmicks. Like, if we look at a super recent boss like Kamazotz, who has 2 guts that happens after he break each of his bars, those are still removable despite being major boss gimmicks, right? So I really think some people are sort of downplaying the power of a full buff purge because of the existence of non-removable buffs, when they don't consider that most buffs you will see in an actual challenge quest are still going to be removable. So really broken for challenge quests, obviously. I think this definitely bumps her all the way up in terms of challenge quest DPS performance. She also has anti-man, you know, a relatively common anti-trait. Too bad that it doesn't scale with overcharge. I definitely would have preferred if this scaled with overcharge, but still having a common anti-trait helps in both challenge quests and also farming. And finally, you know, the overcharge effect is kind of lame, is only 1 turn arts up, so it bolsters her own MP's refund and damage and also any arts carb that follows it for 20% to 40%. It's nothing too amazing. So how do I feel about Kenshin? Well, obviously Kenshin is an extremely powerful servant, both very adept in farming and challenge quests. So in a vacuum, Kenshin's farming performance is very competent. She has almost everything you want in a single target arts DPS that can farm well. She has decent base MP refund, she has a big 50 MP battery, a wide coverage anti-trade with anti-man, and even a targetable overcharge boost that can synergize with other DPSs in multi-core comps, such as other anti-trait DPSs that actually have their anti-traits scale with overcharge, or in particular Tonaliko, who can very much make use of the 2 stages of overcharge to allow you to use her skill 3, which is, you know, AoE 50 MP battery, one of the best skills for multi-core in the game if you're actually able to use it. And even in 111 nodes can very much easily loop single core with double Castoria plug Oberon with no starting charge. So yeah, Kenshin just kind of does everything. She is definitely on the tippy top standard of a single target arts looping farmer. However, there's another SSR that also came out this year that almost can do everything Kenshin does as a single target arts farmer that arguably does it even better: Summer Castoria. So Summer Castoria is also a single target arts DPS with a 50 MP battery, a targetable 2-stage overcharge boost that even comes with another 20 MP battery, and 3 different anti-traits on her MP. Now, one of them is very rare, it almost never hits, the anti-threat humanity one, but she does have 2 very common ones in anti-divine and anti-chaotic. And she has the slight added bonus of both of them being calculated separately, so if somehow she hits a divine chaotic enemy, she actually gets 2 anti-traits against them instead of just 1. Castoria's biggest edge over Kenshin, I would say, is her class. Being a farmer, Berserkers are just infinitely better than Kenshin. Kenshin only does more damage than Castoria in a neutral situation when she's fighting either a Berserker or a Moon Cancer, while Castoria does more damage in every other case. Now, the saving grace for Kenshin is that at the very least, their anti-traits don't really overlap, so if Kenshin is fighting a man attribute enemy that isn't divine nor chaotic, then she's going to do more damage over Castoria despite not being a Berserker class servant. But in most other cases, I will say that Castoria is the superior farmer, also because of her extra 20 MP charge. Castoria having that extra 20% MP charge that is also targetable makes her team building a lot more flexible, because she not just can use it on herself, but for example, she can use it on someone else who might be missing 20 initial charge for their first turn MP. So unfortunately, from a pure gameplay standpoint, I don't really see, you know, Kenshin beating out Summer Castoria anytime soon in terms of farming. Castoria also doesn't have to sacrifice her own steroids by using the overcharge skill on someone else, while Kenshin does have to sacrifice a 20% attack boost, which is significant enough to drop her damage even lower. People also like to bring up Estrella, which I personally think it's a little bit misleading, because most of the time you won't really pull for a ruler just as a Moon Cancer killer. That's sort of too niche of a situation to pull for someone to deal with when you can just use someone like a Berserker instead. So yeah, Estrella, in my opinion, in farming doesn't really come close to Kenshin at all because of her lack of a battery, so we will get into that comparison more in the challenge quest section. Draco was another servant I considered bringing up for comparison, but I do think Draco functions a little bit too different from Kenshin. Draco has no initial charge, so less flexibility in terms of team build. Draco can't hit any of the extra classes, so, you know, less targets than Kenshin, but on the flip side, Draco has anti-servant on all normal class servants, so in that sense she does does have the best coverage out of all of them. So it's kind of a difficult conversation, so that's why I ended up excluding Draco from the farming comparison. So yeah. In terms of Challenge Quest performance, Kenshin has 2 extra advantages that don't really come into play at all when we talk about her farming. The first one obviously is the full buff removal on her MP. Having a spammable buff removal that doesn't allow the enemy to stick any buffs forever is extremely broken, and I don't really think any other single target arts has such a great effect on their MP. Kenshin also has probably the best arts card out of all of these single target arts DPSs, so even after you've run out of the arts ups from your own steroids and your Castorias, Kenshin probably has the easiest time getting her MP back and continue on with the buff removing because of how good her arts cards are. The second advantage is Kenshin's ruler class. Kenshin being in the ruler class makes her exceptionally tanky when she's fighting against the 6 standard classes, excluding berserkers. There are a lot of relevant comparisons that I feel like I can bring up here when talking about Kenshin and single target arts DPSs that do universal damage, so I'm just gonna, go through them one by one and maybe pull up damage comparisons when I think it is relevant on screen while I'm talking about them. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this rapid fire session. Here we go. Estrella is probably the most obviously comparison people will bring up because she is also a single target arts ruler that specializes in crits, but in terms of kit, and when we don't talk about specific anti-traits, I do think Kenshin is a straight upgrade of Estrella. Kenshin has better face cards, better stats, a better skill set, and better MP damage. Even at MP 2, Estrella's upgraded MP matches Kenshin's MP damage, and as the MP level increase, Kenshin obviously is going to overshadow Estrella more and more, because if you don't know, MP upgrades heavily benefit lower MP levels more so than higher MP levels. The one debate between the two would actually be Invul Pierce versus Kenshin's full purge. Now, Invul Pierce can go through non-removable invuls and evades, but I still think in general for challenge quests, full buff removal is a better effect because it will always be useful. There are no enemy bosses that don't use any buffs, but there are definitely bosses that never use an invul or an evade, and buff removal can also bolster your defense in a way by removing enemies' offensive buffs on top of just going through invul and evade. So I think generally having buff purge is a better effect than a invul pierce on the MP, but obviously there are situations where the invul pierce will come into clutch more so than the full buff removal. I do think Estrella's actual biggest advantage is her accessibility. Being a permanent 4-star that has been out for years, people might already have her as a ruler DPS, and if you only want them to specifically counter moon cancers, which by the way I don't think it's worth pulling for a ruler just to deal with moon cancers, but if you really just want to do that, Estrella is more than enough. You don't really have to pull Kenshin on top of that. Another comparison people might make is Summer Castoria, back to her again, and Kenshin has a lot more advantages now when we are talking about challenge quests because once again she has the superior survival ruler class as well as the full buff purge on her MP. Summer Castoria, yeah, she is not really that flimsy, but still she's not going to be nearly as tanky as a ruler. It's nearly a 4 times difference in terms of damage taken if we are fighting against the normal 6 classes for a trade-off of a 0.5 extra % of offensive. So honestly, I think in terms of challenge quest performance, I would prefer Kenshin in most cases just because of how much more safe she is if you're facing off against the normal 6 classes of enemies. But obviously this is not saying that you will have to go for Kenshin for boss killing if you already have someone like Summer Castoria, because she can hold her own pretty well still. So it really depends on your preference, and it also depends on the boss, whether Summer Castoria's defensive disadvantage will come into play as much. So for example, if you're fighting against an AoE damage dealing boss, then suddenly Kenshin is a lot better because Castoria can't really dodge the hits by RNG and will have to take those hits every single turn. However, if you're fighting against certain bosses that only do single target damage, and you're running a team that has a lot of like taunt CEs even to redirect your damage away from Summer Castoria, then you know it suddenly becomes not that big of an issue. So this is definitely more of a difficult conversation in my opinion. I still do think though that full buff Perch is a better effect than Summer Castoria's MP's solemn defense for a turn. We all know rulers are very good at dealing with the standard 6 classes on top of Moon Cancers because they take half damage from them, so effectively they can tank twice as much damage as a standard neutral class. However, we got Draco this year, who can arguably do this even better than a ruler. Essentially, Draco is trading that Moon Cancer class advantage for a Berserker class advantage, which is a lot more common in today's challenge quests and boss fights. And Draco also, on top of taking half damage, deals 1.5 times extra damage against them. So Draco, in terms of class alone, is way superior than Kenshin in terms of dealing with the standard 7 classes. However, the moment you insert 1 to 2 extra class enemies in that lineup, Draco suddenly falls very flat because she has full class disadvantage against them, while Kenshin most likely will have neutral class advantage against them unless they inserted an Avenger. So very much depends on the situation who is better than who. As a short conclusion of the challenge quest section of the video, it is obviously a lot less cut and dry than the farming one, because now Kenshin's 2 most valuable assets in buff removal and the ruler class advantage actually comes into play. So even though Kenshin might not be as universally offensive as Summer Castoria, if the boss has a lot of pressure that applies to the DPS and threatens to kill them every single turn, then maybe Kenshin's sheer tankiness as a ruler will prevail over Summer Castoria. Kenshin might not be as good at dealing with the standard 7 class enemies as Draco, but if the boss fight has extra class mixed in, then Kenshin might be a better middle of the ground pick, who is able to do neutral damage to the other extra classes, as opposed to Draco, who gets absolutely screwed over by them. Also, Kenshin might be the best soloer out of the 3 because of her superior arts card, giving her the best consistency in solo MP looping. And of course, finally, if the boss has a lot of spammable buffs and buff removal becomes a key win condition, then Kenshin would obviously overshadow everything else we've talked about thus far in terms of CQ performance. So I can't really confidently tell you who is stronger. It's very much dependent on the situation, your investment in each of them, and the boss you're facing off against. But all I can confidently tell you is that if you really like Kenshin, and if you grail her, you invest MP levels into her and whatnot, she's going to be one of the strongest DPSs in the game, and I struggle to think of anything that she can't beat. Minus a super difficult Avenger boss, maybe, then she might have trouble against them. But anything else, I don't really see Kenshin struggling against, like, ever. In conclusion, Uesugi Kenshin is a phenomenal servant, excelling in both farming and challenge quest performance. If she was released anywhere before this year, she'd undoubtedly be treated as one of the strongest single target servants ever released. However, unfortunate for her, we got 2 other phenomenal single target arts SSR DPSs this year. Castoria Summer, who is arguably more universally offensive and better in farming than her, and Draco, who is more unique than her because she is the first beast class in the game. So she is kind of overshadowed with these 2 other titans looming over her. However, Uesugi Kenshin's power level is undeniable. Her unique ability of spamming buff removals during challenge quests, and her arguably strongest card data out of all art servants we've seen in recent memory is definitely nothing to scoff at. And generally, her great class as a ruler and her solid crit skill set definitely puts her nearly on the same level as characters such as Draco and Castoria, and under certain circumstances, even outperforming them. And that is definitely extremely high praise in my personal opinion. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I apologize, this might be a little bit all over the place, but Kenshin has so many good that I want to talk about, but I only have this much time in each video, and we definitely will be seeing more Kenshin action in the future because she will be slaying bosses left and right because of how good she is as a servant. So Wish you the best of luck if you want to pull for Uesugi Kenshin. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys in the next one.